Hi there, welcome back to Practically Social, episode 10. Tonight we're going to be covering more in our cognitive behavioral therapy series. This is the third installment of that where we'll be talking about CBT tools. Thanks again for joining me. Thank you for all of the support you've been giving me in terms of subscribing and liking and commenting. I really appreciate that. And you're helping out the channel here by helping it to grow, which is also hopefully helping others to grow. So tonight we'll be talking about thought logging, then as a tool for cognitive behavioral therapy, and also we'll be talking about utilizing those thought logs to create charts, and then from those charts we'll learn a lot of things about ourselves, and from those types of applications we can move on to getting down to some of the beliefs that we have, and then also how we can come up with alternative thoughts and things like changing our thought patterns and then hopefully changing some of our beliefs about ourselves. As I was sharing before, we have the CBT Iceberg. So I'd like you to use the CBT Iceberg to refer to, and I'll pop it up here on the screen occasionally as we go through some of these exercises in our CBT toolkit. So just remember to keep the CBT Iceberg in mind. That's kind of our diagram for the theory that we're following and the process that we're using to get to some insight and hopefully some change in thoughts, behaviors, and actions. All right, so I'm going to put this up here first. Talked in the first video about activating events and how those affect us. Some people call these triggers. They're also known as environmental cues. So this could be something that happens during our day, and it's usually something that is stressful to us for some reason. I'm not talking about positive things here, though we could also journal about positive things and lots of positive things that happen in our lives in terms of gratitude and joy and keeping things more balanced with some of the negative that is happening in our lives. I'm not saying that we don't take this into account, but I'm using these exercises specifically for negative thoughts and feelings. All right, so after something negative happens, we have a negative thought in response to that. Then we usually have a negative feeling according to this model. We can come up with an alternative thought or try to gain perspective from the situation that's happening. And we can gain perspective on our own thinking about what's happening and hopefully reorder some of the feeling that we have, in which we would then re-rate the feeling that we were having here. So here in a moment, I'll show you how to turn this into a chart, and then we'll also assign some numerical value to some of the feeling that we're having. This tends to be more of a scientific approach and turns my clients into scientists and explorers in their own world, rather than just reacting to things and not understanding where all of this is coming from. So I found it to be pretty helpful. And I'd also like to try and encourage you to use some of this the next time you're having something negative going on in your life, or if you notice a pattern of negative things. Doing some journaling and some of this thought logging, and then also coming up with alternative thoughts, can be a useful exercise for increasing some of the positive emotions, positive thoughts, and then hopefully reordering some of the beliefs that you have that are negative and turning some of those positive. I do want to remind you that this isn't about trying to make everything positive. There is usefulness in the negative emotions that we feel as well. And it usually indicates something that we could change, though we may not always be comfortable changing it. So when you ask yourself if you want to change something, you also might ask yourself, am I ready to change that? And if I do change it, what would be the implications of that? Change isn't easy, and a lot of times we think we want to change, but then when it comes time to make the change, we're really not willing to do it. So that's where affirmations come in, which is another part of this that I'd like to include is, okay, we've had some negative activating events. We've had some negative thoughts and negative feelings. We've come up with some alternative thoughts that might help us to feel a little bit better about what's going on. And then hopefully our feeling is less negative than it was before. But what are some things that we can say to ourselves on a regular basis that might help us feel more positive in general? We have to continue to repeat a lot of things to ourselves because, as someone said recently, negative thoughts are 70 to 80 times more powerful when we speak them out loud. The way that I try to overcome this is by setting affirmations for myself. So there's a couple different tools that I employ here as well. So if I have a negative thought about myself, maybe it's based on a negative belief, but I keep repeating this to myself over and over in my head, what I like to do is come up with the complete opposite of that. So if I say something to myself like, I'm never enough, I call this technique flipping the coin. I say I'm never enough to myself, then I flip the coin. I turn the coin over, and on the other side, I'm always enough. This isn't about being egotistical, it's just about creating another polar opposite of the negative that I'm thinking. So, what do I use that tool for? Well, it's generally not one or the other. It's generally somewhere in between. So if I feel something extremely negative, I have to create something extremely positive in order to balance that out. Then I can look toward the middle of all that and say anything in between these two is possible, but it's neither extremely positive nor extremely negative. So that is the flipping the coin technique, and it's just designed to give me two sides, which then I can then shoot toward the middle for. The next technique I like to use when I'm in the process of creating affirmations is the video game analogy. We have video games that are first person, where everything that the character sees is through the character's eyes. It's very much like this. If you've ever played one of these kind of video games, you know what I'm talking about. In order for you to see anything within this game, you have to turn and look around. Okay? So, I like to think that we're typically in this first-person kind of perspective. However, one of the things that helps us gain balance and become more positive in our thinking and our actions is to take what I call the third-person perspective. Some also call this bird's eye view. So instead of looking through the character's eyes like this, the character being me and how I'm perceiving the world around me, I like to take a step back from that. It's almost like the camera angle has pulled back all the way and we can see ourselves in the middle there, and then we're able to see all the different types of things that are going on around us as well. I'm sure you've seen some of these types of video games as well. And though there's benefits to both perspectives, I think that being able to use this third-person perspective is a little healthier in terms of creating positive thinking and positive actions. So those will be some of the things that I'll be illustrating here. In the next part of the video as I take you through the chart, and then also as I show you how to create some affirmations. Alright, so let's start with the thought logging and the chart. Tool number 1. In the first column, I'd like you to put something negative that happened this week or in the last week in the first column. What was the activating event that set you off? Second, I'd like you to put the thought you had in response to that. What did you think as soon as this happened? Third, the feeling that you had in response to that thought. Also, I'd like you to give that a numerical value. So give it a 0 to 10 and rate how severe it was, with 10 being the most severe feeling and 0 being no feeling at all. Next, let's look at an alternative thought. So this thing upset you. You had a thought about it. It made you feel bad. What are the other possibilities in this scenario? If you take yourself out of that first person perspective and put yourself in that third person perspective, what are some of the other views you might have of this situation that might change that first thought you had or the feeling you had? Go ahead and list those. All right, so now we're going to use those alternative thoughts and see if it changed the feeling you had there in the third column. Re-rate the feeling that you had in the third column. Is it the same number you had before? Is it less? This is the tool called thought logging and the chart that I use to do so. I like to use a spiral bound notebook. I turn it into landscape format. I put each of the columns down the paper, and I can use this anytime I'm upset about anything. I can also use it at night before I go to bed. Maybe something was bothering me and I've been thinking it over, feeling bad. So I'll get my journal out, turn the paper sideways, and I'll go ahead and do one of these thought logs in order to get some alternative thoughts. Secondly, we have affirmations. So affirmations are things that we tell ourselves that are positive. A lot of people will post these on their mirror. Some people put them on their refrigerator. Some people tape them to the visor in their car, so when they pull the visor in their car down, they can see it. Any of these ideas is a good place to try. However, forming the affirmations is a little harder than a lot of people think. So I like to start with strengths and say, what are some of your strengths that you have? So go ahead and take that same sheet of paper that you were using for your thought log there to write some of your strengths down. Just write 5 of them down. They can be anything. They don't have to be therapy related. They're not academic. Maybe they're not work related. Just go ahead and write down 5 of those strengths that you have. Okay, great. So you have 5 of your strengths there. Now, what are some of the things that you typically think about yourself that are negative? And when we go back to the CBT Iceberg, you can look down there at the bottom for thoughts and beliefs about yourself that are negative. Okay, you've got a few of those. If you don't have any of those yet, just continue to think about that for a while. You can always come back to this exercise whenever you'd like. But what I'd like for you to do now is contrast some of those negative things that you say about yourself with some of the strengths you have. Now, the other thing I'd like you to do is to take some of those thoughts and go ahead and flip the coin on them to create something that you have which is very negative and something which you have which is very positive. What are the options in between those two polar opposites? Now use the third person perspective. If someone else heard you saying these negative things about yourself, what would they say to you? It needs to be someone positive. Maybe it would be something your therapist would tell you or has told you that's positive about you. What would those be? Now we can contrast the negative with some of the positive, or even some things that are in the middle of that. And what I'd like you to do is to create a new statement about yourself that's positive instead of the negative statement that you were telling yourself before. If your negative statement was something like, I fail at everything, and your positive statement was, I succeed at everything, maybe your affirmation is, I continue to try whether I fail or I succeed. Affirmations should be positive, they should be realistic, and they should address your negative thoughts. I'm not asking you to pretend that everything is okay or that it will be okay, or that you'll live happily ever after. That's not what we're looking for here. We're just trying to be realistic and shoot toward the middle perhaps and say, some things yes, some things no. However, it's not always negative. Okay? Because that's where negative feelings come from. And then what happens is a lot of times people start behaving based on these negative beliefs they have about themselves, which turn into their negative thoughts and their negative feelings. And so they're acting out of these negative feelings a lot. And then it just, when things don't turn out the way they want them to, and this is myself included, then it reinforces all these negative beliefs and thoughts we have about ourselves. So if we spend some time practicing some of these thought logging exercises and charting, flipping coin, gaining perspective, going to third person, creating positive affirmations for ourselves, hopefully we start to break some of the chains of negativity, anxiety, depression, fear, and a lot of discord in relationships, negative, dysfunctional relationships, these kinds of things. Then we can do things additionally like set boundaries and set relationships with people that help reinforce the positive rather than the negative. I hope that was helpful, and I hope you'll join me again next week on episode 11. We're going to be switching gears and moving to something a little different, so stay tuned for that next week on Practically Social. If you would go ahead and hit subscribe down there where the submarine is, that would help our channel to grow and help others to grow as well. See you next week.